Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday gathering at the storehouse. I'm so pleased that you're here today, and I'm very happy to still be here. Well, there's a lot going on in the world, and I feel very badly about the incident over this past few days in France. But I know we've been talking about this for a long time, so about these kind of incidents. And Tony's here with me today, and I'm happy that he is because he's clear over in Budapest, Hungary, doing a little studying over there. But I'm happy that he's with us today because I'm sure he has a lot to talk about in the light of what's been going on in the world today with this episode in France. And so, welcome to the show, Tony.
Good morning, Dad. We really got a lot going on today. My own head is full of all the information I've been trying to gather. I've been presenting the case for quite some time now that strings are being pulled on every side, that Russia's military has been built up for a reason by people who are pulling the same strings as the Zionist agenda, by the people who are pulling the same strings as the United States of America, that all of this is happening toward some sort of plan. And last week I said that I was going to talk a little about the Albert Pike predictions of the 3 world wars. And so I want to get into that a little bit today, but I want to broaden our scope just a little bit to see how that fits, because as I've been doing a little study, of course, there is no record of these supposed letters that existed that were written by Albert Pike. These are something that was claimed by some Cardinal Rodriguez of Santiago, Chile, and then it was expounded upon by, it seems, several people, but the one most notably is someone by the name of William Guy Carr, who published a book in 1958 titled Pawns in the Game, in which he seems to quote these excerpts that he had been made aware of, if I'm getting my facts straight. Again, if I'm not, please try and stick with the overall direction that we're going today, because what I'm going to try and do is pull a few strings together that demonstrate that in fact all of this all of this history we're seeing, including these false flags. And yes, I'm going to tell you, what's happening in Paris is a false flag. There are no Muslim terrorists the way they're presenting it. ISIS is not doing this from some little city they've captured in Syria or Iraq, and they're now terrorizing the world. How can I say that? Well, if you go back and listen to what we've been saying for some time now, when ISIS was just a flag and then they were just a small band, I was predicting that they would have to get so big and awful if this were the time, if this was the group that was going to bring us to this predicted World War III, or what we look at from the scriptural point of view as Armageddon. And if that's what's going on right now, then this ISIS I saw had to be this is the tool being used to bring everybody in. And I've been saying for weeks, I've been pointing out that it doesn't make any sense to me that Russia is so powerful, that America is unable to even slow ISIS down. Even when America and Turkey established a safe zone on the border of Turkey and Syria, 60-mile safe zone, we couldn't keep but be routed by ISIS, we were told. So who are these guys? They don't even have any planes. And now you're going to find out in some of these articles, I mean, we've been bombing them for a year. What are we bombing? How many? Syria is a country with 22 million people, they say, and 11 million of them are on the run. Iraq's a country we've been in for, a dozen years or more, and you can read some other articles about the influence the past several U.S. Governments, from Bush and the first Bush and Clinton and the second Bush and Obama, we've had our hands in there for too many years now to imagine that we just have no intelligence. We don't know how to protect any of the assets there. And I'm wondering, who are these guys? What are you bombing for a year? I mean, let's face it. Okay, Syria, 22 million people. There's more than that in Southern California. So imagine if you were trying to bomb assets in Southern California. I mean, how long would it take to take out the electrical plant, to take out the water treatment plant, to take out the oil refineries, to sort of fortify certain strongholds? I mean, a year with the technology, the intelligence, the weapons that we have, and we've been bombing these people for a year, and they just keep showing the same line of Toyota trucks. Apparently, we can't even blow up any of their Toyota trucks. And so none of this makes any sense unless you fit it, as I've said, into some context that lets it all somehow come to life. And the context, of course, is this World War III that's been planned. So while I'll lay that down as our initial where we're going today, let's start with a couple of articles, because it's not going to take much with what's going on in the news. There's so much. But just a couple of days ago, right after the attacks occurred, Bloomberg Business, an article by Mark Dean and perhaps also Edward Johnson, it seems both names are on this. The title of it is "Complexity of Paris Attacks Carries Hallmarks of Trained Fighters." So they knew right off the bat, or they were telling us right off the bat, I'll just quote here, "For terrorists to inflict such a large amount of damage, they must have been trained very well," said Ghanem Nusseibeh, founder of Cornerstone Global Associates, which advises clients on risk in the Middle East. "The equipment, the timing, and coordination show that it's not a layman and it's not a lone attacker." So, I don't want to be in any way coy or understate the seriousness of the human tragedy to point out that these are false flags that I have been predicting for many weeks. If you go back and listen to some of the shows that we've done, I knew as soon as they showed us that these wave of refugees contained ISIS terrorists being snuck in, and they were telling us that they contained terrorists, and we were telling all the people, be afraid, they're sending terrorists in with the refugee crisis. And then I've been pointing out how 11 million people have fled Syria in the last few years, but only some few 100,000 have actually crossed into Europe. So it seems like they're using the fact that all of the reasonably affluent Syrians that have the money to flee to a richer part of Europe and go get a job, they're using them as the scapegoats or the patsies for this terrorism that they were going to bring on the world. And I'm afraid that this is only beginning. Let me just get that straight right off the bat. This is not a climax. This is the intro. And I don't doubt that England and America at some point, when the time is right, will feel it as well. But from the first moment the attacks happened, they were already pointing to the fact that this had to be coming from some well-organized. This wasn't just, a couple of lunatics out blowing something up. We have to be able to pin this on ISIS. And well, of course, now, one day later, or as of yesterday, Saturday, Reuters article by Eric Knecht, Islamic State says France remains top target. And this article I will just read a little bit of because I think it captures the propaganda they want us all to know. Islamic State claimed responsibility on Saturday for attacks that killed 127 people in Paris, saying it sent militants strapped with suicide bombing belts and carrying machine guns to various locations in the heart of the capital. The attacks, described by France's president as an act of war, were designed to show the country would remain in danger as long as it continued its current policies, Islamic State said in a statement. Quote, to teach France and all nations following its path that they will remain at the top of Islamic State's list of targets and that the smell of death won't leave their noses as long as they partake in their Crusader campaign, said the group. French President François Hollande said the violence was organized from abroad by Islamic State with internal help. Quote, faced with war, the country must take appropriate action, he said, without saying what that meant. Okay, and then they go on to give us some details of it, and they repeat a couple of times, it's an act of war. So, three times in this article it says it was an act of war. So now, of course, this has brought the whole world into the, as I've been saying for many weeks, is what it would have to do. This is what, I mean, that's why I want to start from here today, Dad, and get to all the reasons why it ties into something that's been staged and planned for an awful long time. First of all, again, these people with their Toyota trucks and not a plane, with apparently sending their militants through refugees, are able to terrorize the world. When I grew up, I mean, until this happened, any of this kind of thing, if it were real, would have been stomped out so fast. The whole world would have turned on these people. I mean, you could literally send hundreds of thousands of troops to go march through these towns that Islamic State apparently holds, Raqqa and Mosul. I mean, how big are these places? If the whole country of Syria has only got 22 million people, how hard would it be with our technology, with our weaponry, to literally round these people up, even if you had to surround their city like Jericho, right? So I don't buy it. And also, as I said years ago, this suicide bombing thing, I'm starting to see the Hollywood in that. No, if that was real, Dad and I talked about it several years ago when 9/11 happened. And I saw that, if you remember, after 9/11, it was this same propaganda to the West, to America anyway, that this was all-out jihad. Every Muslim was being called to join the jihad, and Americans had to be scared to death so we could pass all these laws and go start slaughtering Afghanistan and Iraq and the things that we've done to set all this up. How was that perpetrated through the propaganda? Well, by telling us that, hey man, these people are unstoppable. They're strapping bombs to themselves. Of course, back then there was practically a suicide bomber on a bus, every other week in Jerusalem, and we were told back then, this is many years ago now, that these people are, there's no stopping them because they're brought up that way. They're indoctrinated from childhood, taught that Israelis are pigs and dogs and all these things we were told, that they're going to go to heaven and get 70 virgins if they go kill the infidels. And so what Dad and I discussed many years ago is, well, if that's really true, how do you turn that on and off the way they have seemingly done over many years now? I mean, you don't hear about suicide bombs every week. It used to go on every week. When I first started sailing in 2006 and 2007, that was what was in the newspaper. These suicide bombings were going on constantly. Well, why did they stop? If all these children, where did all these children that now would be old enough, how come they stopped climbing onto buses with suicide missions? I mean, how could you stop them if they were indoctrinated to know that this is how you serve Allah. Not only that, this is how you achieve the greatest possible life in the afterlife, full of virgins for yourself. Well, who could stop them, and why would they stop? So I saw the signs of it many years ago, that this is something being turned on and off like a faucet, which means it's not really true, because you can't get people to go kill themselves because you pay them. Come on. How much do you have to, how much do you have to offer me to go blow myself up? How hard is it to recruit those people? So we were shown in our propaganda that it's not about money. These people are completely religious fanatics that are committed. Well, over the years now, I've learned that, first of all, that suicide bombing is no more Muslim than it is Christian. So these are not Muslims of any ilk at all. There's nothing religious or Islamic about someone supposedly strapping a suicide bomb to themselves to kill their enemy. Anyone that desperate could not be stopped. When you're so desperate that only death will satisfy your need for change, how do you simply turn that off for some political process that's not brought these people any relief whatsoever? So I want to point that out, that strangely enough, all of the people that carried out these bombings in Paris are all dead, all suicide bombs, we're told. And I'm going to go ahead and present that that's not true. Nobody's strapping bombs to themselves, because you can't get someone to do that at your beck and call and then stop when you want them to stop. That's the sort of deep commitment that you cannot stop, like the French Revolution. Those people said, we'd rather die than put up with it any longer, and they did die. They threw their bodies into it until they changed it. And it wasn't until the funding came for the royalty to go slaughter all those people that the royalty got the territory back. But first the funding came for the revolutionaries. And the revolutionaries were so committed that they went and threw their bodies at it until there were no more bodies to throw. And so if this was a real religious fanatical movement, the suicide bombings would have never stopped. You could have never stopped them. There's been Muslims living all over the world for the last 15, 20 years, and what was to stop them from continuing the terror that they'd already had going against Israel? They were suicide bombing all over the world back then, Indonesia and different places. And we were told that it was for this reason that they were so deeply committed. And then suddenly, no more suicide bombings. All these children that have been indoctrinated, I guess they just ran out of kids, and now we got that's how you'd have to see it now. We got a new class of them. Anyway, so I want to present that this is all propaganda. That, first of all, a Muslim wouldn't do that. We've been told that last week or week or two ago we read in one of these propaganda pieces that Sunni Muslims are leaving in droves, and that the Islamic States had to pen them into these cities that they've got control of to keep the people from leaving, because of course nobody wants to be part of this movement. This isn't religious. This isn't sane. This can only bring calamity onto everyone, as it is meant to. And so, of course, the only people that belong to this and are willing to go through with this, we've found out, are being paid $1,000 a day by Saudi Arabia. These are mercenaries. These are mercenaries working for who? Is where we're going to go today. But I want to present that, I hope people listening to me will understand this is not real. These are not Muslims. It's real in the sense that they're killing people, that they're not doing it with suicide bombers. They're blowing things up, and they're blaming, when do you see any of this? Show me one of the blown up suicide bombers. I mean, not that it would be hard necessarily for Hollywood to present that, but I've been saying for a long time, when I grew up, we had the Vietnam War, and it was on TV every night. You had war correspondents out in the field with the fighters, and the gunfire's flying over people's heads. People are dying all around you. You could see a war going on. You could watch the war happening before your very eyes. Well, here we've got Islamic State, and they're taking over cities. They're being bombed for a year. And all the pictures you see, correct me if I'm wrong, always show some tiny group of people with guns in their hand, one person with a flag in their hand, a line of Toyota trucks with apparently no capacity for Russia, America, or any of these potent militaries to actually blow up that line of trucks, because we know they can see them from satellite, without ever being detected. Our forces. We could send down bombs from the sky on these people, but no, we've been bombing for a year, and I've never seen one actual picture of battles going on. What are these battles that are taking place? We've never seen one. And so I'm going to present that this is all Hollywood. This is all Hollywood, and it's for a very good reason that I want to get to today, but let's just go through a couple of the headlines from Saturday just to lay the foundation of what we're being told in the propaganda. So the first one is France remains a target. France now is talking about this is war, and if you've listened to me for any time, any length of time, you know that I in fact predicted this. So next article. This is AFP, which I assume means Associated French Press, I think we learned. Syria's Assad. Paris attacks result of French policy. So now, this Yahoo site, I hope everyone will get off of Yahoo. It works so slowly. It's almost like it's made to keep people from investigating anything. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said Saturday that French policy had contributed to the spread of terrorism that culminated in attacks claimed by the Islamic State group, which killed 128 people in Paris. In a meeting with the delegation of French lawmakers in Damascus, Assad said France's mistaken policies had contributed to the spread of terrorism. The terrorist attacks that targeted the French capital Paris cannot be separated from what happened in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, lately, and from what has been happening in Syria for the past 5 years and in other areas, he said. Assad was referring to twin bombings claimed by ISIS, which killed 44 people on Thursday in the southern suburbs of Beirut, a stronghold of his Lebanese ally, Shiite militant group Hezbollah. Assad regards all the rebel groups fighting his forces inside Syria as terrorists, not just ISIS. Assad said he had warned against what would happen in Europe for the past 3 years. We said, don't take what is happening in Syria lightly. Unfortunately, European officials did not listen, he said, in comments to the delegation broadcast by France's Europe 1 radio. He said French President François Hollande should change his policy. The question that is being asked throughout France today is, was France's policy over the past 5 years the right one? The answer is no. This is all quotes from Assad, pointing out. And I'm saying it's all to run this divide now into people because, I've been predicting it. The Christian world, the quote-unquote Western Christian world, has got to be completely divided, completely in terror, and ready to send all their children to go kill all the Muslims. And I say this is just the beginning. It's going to get worse. There's going to be people killing each other in the streets over this. That's what you're going to, not just Muslims, I mean French people. Europeans are going to be killing each other in the streets over what's to be done. Okay, next article. Same AFP from Saturday. Putin calls for unity against terrorism after Paris attack. So, I also predicted this. We're not going to have a war with Russia. I said several weeks ago, Russia and America have to come together because ISIS has to be stopped, and it's only because of some sort of fallout now that all the guns are there, some accidental, some unintentional consequences that will escalate the war with Russia. But uh, this article simply points out that yes, now Russia is claiming that hey, we got to get together to stop this ISIS. Okay, so everyone in the world right now is on that same page. This is just now it's reaching the pitch that I was predicting, almost a year ago when I saw what the propaganda was trying to say about this CIA created mercenary army that's got nothing to do with Islam, and yet none of our journalism points that out. None of our journalism points out the absurd incongruity of what happened on 9/11 and the all-out jihad that was called for then by Al-Qaeda, which had been around so much longer and was so much more diffused into the world at that time than what ISIS has suddenly been able to do against a much more fortified world. I mean, after 9/11, right? Security went up, production of guns have gone up. Russia's created a military as big as America. America's gone into all sorts of security measures. Israel, the whole world has been on heightened security. And what did we have? Arab Spring, which I called a false flag at the time that paved the way for all this. And I said it was all to a purpose. And this is where I want to go today, as I sort of promised last week that I would try and talk about the prediction. And now before I do, I'm going to start at the other end of the scale, the historical scale, and I want to go to something I found here on a site called Scribd, Scribd, about Carroll Quigley. If people don't know who Professor Carroll Quigley was, you're going to find out here in just a second. This is something, it's quite a long article, so I'm just going to try and read pieces of it. This is by Michael L. Chadwick, and it says, in 1965, one of the nation's leading professors quietly finished the last draft of a 1,311-page book on world history. He walked over to his typewriter and secured the last pages of the book and placed them into a small box and wrapped it for mailing. He then walked to the post office and mailed the final draft to his publisher in New York City. The editor was somewhat overwhelmed and perhaps even inhibited by the scholarly treatise. The last thing he wanted to do was to read the huge draft. He knew and trusted the professor. After all, he was one of the leading scholars in the Western world. They had been acquaintances for several years. He had already signed an agreement to publish the book before it was finished. He had read several chapters of the early draft. They were boring, at least to him. He decided to give the book to a young editor who had just been promoted to his assistant. The young editor was also overwhelmed, but happy to oblige the senior editor. The young editor was unaware of the importance of the manuscript and of the revelations which it contained. To the young editor, this was just another textbook, or so he thought. Somehow, one of the most revealing books ever published slipped through the editorial offices of one of the major publishing houses in New York and found its way onto the bookstores of America in 1966. 5 years later, I was meandering through a used bookstore and stumbled upon this giant book. I picked up the book, blew the dust off, and opened it to a page where the author stated that, quote, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, now known as the World Bank, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. There's so much information here. I don't want to have to read it all. I would like to get The chief architects of this new world empire are planning another war, World War III, to eliminate any vestiges of political, economic, or religious freedom from the face of the earth. They will then completely control the earth and its natural resources. The people will be completely enslaved, just as the people were in the ancient Roman Empire. While the above may sound like fiction, I can assure you that it is true. I wish it was fiction, but it is not. It is reality. And I'll read one more little part here. There's so much of this I would like to share, but I'm going to have to stay within a little bit of a scope today. Of course, the book is from Professor Carroll Quigley, titled Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. It was published in 1966. It was withdrawn shortly after that, and apparently they're not easy to find anymore, but the cat was let out of the bag many years ago. The above professor describes the network I have just described in elaborate detail, far too elaborate for most people. That is why I'm truly surprised that it was ever published. The above fictional account of its publication may not be far from the truth. The contents of the above book will probably astound most people. Most people will undoubtedly not believe the professor. That will be a great mistake. Why? Because many of the tragedies of the future may be avoided with proper action. Anyway, this is quite a long discussion of this book, so I encourage people, if you search Carroll Quigley, Tragedy and Hope, History of the World in Our Time, this is this article that I was quoting from by Michael L. Chadwick, is at this scribed.com site. Okay, so I'm starting here at 1966 with Professor Quigley pointing out that there's a group of people in the world that have aims to control the world in the way the Roman Empire did, but to control the whole world. Financial, economic, political, all the resources, all the people have them, and they're going to do it through this banking cartel. Well, you know, when you look at the history from then to now, and you look at the way the World Bank and the central banks have come to control the nations, and he says in here that all nation states fall into that category. That's the part I was hoping to read, because it also lists Russia and China, the very thing that I've been talking about for some time. Let's see. I'm going to read one more part of this before I go on. I hope people find this interesting. This is back to this Michael L. Chadwick relating Carroll Quigley's book. There really is a world system of financial control in private hands that is able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world. I call this system the World Trade Federation. It's an ultra-secret group of the most powerful men on earth. They now control every major international institution, every major multinational and transnational corporation, both public and private, every major domestic and international banking institution, every central bank, every nation state on earth, the natural resources on every continent, and the people around the world through complicated interlocking networks that resemble giant spider webs. This group is comprised of the leading family dynasties of the Canada, United States, Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, Russia, and China. This self-perpetuating group has developed an elaborate system of control that enables them to manipulate government leaders, consumers, and people throughout the world. They are in the last stages of developing a world empire that will rival the ancient Roman Empire. However, this new empire will rule the entire world, not just a goodly portion of it, as Rome did long ago from its ultra-secret world headquarters in Germany. This group is responsible for the death and suffering of over 180 million men, women, and children. They were responsible for World War I, World War II, the Korean War and Vietnam, etc. They have created periods of inflation and deflation in order to confiscate and consolidate the wealth of the world. They were responsible for the enslavement of over 2 billion people in all communist nations, Russia, China, Eastern Europe, etc., inasmuch as they were directly responsible for the creation of communism in these nations. They built up and sustained these evil totalitarian systems for private gain. They brought Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and Roosevelt to power and guided their governments from behind the scenes to achieve a state of plunder unparalleled in world history. So now that's his opinion of what comes out of Carroll Quigley's view from 1966 of these people that are in charge and what they're after. Okay, so now let's go to 1958. Let's go back now to a book called Pawns in the Game by William Guy Carr. Now this is where we get the quotes about the world wars. And this is where you also get, for me, this different view where it's all about Satanism rather than money control. And I'm still, I offer it up for people to make their own decision. Is Satanism being used as an excuse by bankers to dominate the world, or are bankers being used by some satanic spiritual system? So this William Guy Carr, his view is the latter, that this is a satanic system that goes all the way back to the Old Testament, all the way back to Nimrod, right? So if we're going to believe in this idea that sort of a anthropocentric Satan, a Satan that's working in the world the way a person would work in the world, or a personage, some sort of force in the world, well, it's not hard to imagine that ever since the line of Noah, ever since Ham, cursed by his father Noah, is this system that finally comes in to the modern day. So this is the point of view from this William Guy Carr, and I don't know enough of his writing to be able to give an opinion on that. I just know that this is what is proposed to be what's behind it all, or why. And in the modern day, it ties in to the Rothschilds, that's where it comes down to us. And if you want to trace that, I'll read just a little bit here of what this reviewer has written about this book, or about this topic. The Red Shield, Rothschilds and Associates, are the modern version, which is the most virulent, like a virus. This author recommends Springmeier for the MK Ultra subject, Jim DeCamp's experience for the pedophilia Satanism aspect, G.E. Griffin for the Central Bank Federal Reserve aspect, the LaRoche PAC organization for the drug aspect, Dope Inc., Edward Bernays for his book on propaganda, Kurt Lewin for the topological psychology aspect, Aquino for the more detailed satanic aspects, Hislop for the mystery religion aspects of the Babylonian Roman Catholic Church, the history of the Rockefeller, Rothschild, and Bush families for monopolist aspects. George H.W. Bush encapsulates all of them and is one of the highest representatives of the cabal, who was a close friend of the Saxe-Gothas, known as the Windsors. The tax-free foundations are a prime aspect of the infiltration and dumbing down of the education of the world. Many, many artisan writers, intelligence agents, all are Illuminati Satanists, and then he names off a bunch, from Stephen King to Picasso. And so, again, is that all true, or is that to mislead us, the public, into chasing after red herrings and chasing our tails. I don't know, but that's not where I want to go today. I'm not trying to prove that. What I'm trying to point out is the evidence of a planned war, a predicted war, an engineered war, that these are not happening in any way organically, that these are things that are happening quite through some mechanism of control. Whether that mechanism is Satan himself, or whether that mechanism is, as Carol Quigley was trying to illustrate, a group of the most rich and powerful men in the world with a grand scheme. So now let's go back to what we wanted to talk about, which is Albert Pike's predictions. Now, what I've learned, and let me read it to you here. It's a commonly believed fallacy that for a short time the Pike letter to Mazzini was on display in the British Museum Library in London, and it was copied by William Guy Carr, former intelligence officer in the Royal Canadian Navy. The British Library has confirmed in writing to me, this author who's writing this, that such a document has never been in their possession. Furthermore, in Carr's book, Satan, Prince of This World, Carr includes the following footnote, quote, "The keeper of manuscripts recently informed the author that this letter is not catalogued in the British Museum Library. It seems strange that a man of Cardinal Rodriguez's knowledge should have said that it was in 1925. People that listen to me know that that's where I take this back to, because 1925 seems to be where these quotes were first gotten. Now, Albert Pike was lived in from 1802 or something to 1891. He lived in the 1800s. He's credited with being the founder of the Scottish Masonic Rite, and he was a general in the Confederate Army in the Civil War and such. Now, this Mazzini, that as these things that I've just read to, that's why I don't want to try and give a history lesson here, because there's a lot of history to swallow in one day, but they're trying to point out that Mazzini is responsible for founding the mafia in Italy in 1860. So this is the time period we're talking about, and what I want people to get out of it is that these movers and shakers around this late 19th century, it seems a little coincidental that the First World War and the end of the 19th century, the established Zionist movement, all fit like puzzle pieces that fall right into place in such a story as I'm trying to illuminate here, as something that's been planned perhaps since the 19th century, and that came down all the way into a time like Carol Quigley in the 20th century, mid-20th century, to be something that was seen by him as a cabal of bankers that had plans and the capability to control every nation state, including Russia and China. And so now let's get to the actual, these quotes that have been thrown around now, perhaps since 1925, at least since 1958 through William Guy Carr, but he got them somewhere. So I'll go on with this, and now I'm on a site called 3worldwars.com. So this is someone, it appears to be a Christian site, so people might know that I find it suspect in that right, but I'm not sure that their information is not correct. And this part is titled Albert Pike and 3 World Wars, Pike's letter to Mazzini. It appears that Carr learned about this letter from Cardinal Rodriguez of Santiago, Chile, who wrote The Mystery of Freemasonry Unveiled. To date, no conclusive proof exists to show that this letter was ever written. Nevertheless, the letter is widely quoted and the topic of much discussion. Following are apparently extracts of the letter showing how 3 world wars have been planned for many generations. Now, again, this is the part, whether this is fiction or not, you decide for yourself. I find it a little bit hard to reconcile that this is fiction when the world has taken this path, even if it wasn't even written until 1958 by William Guy Carr, because we know by then it was written in his book. So even if he saw the First World War and saw the Second World War and was fictionalizing a story, it's still kind of difficult to imagine how he knew 50 years later, after his lifetime, how the Third World War would come about and why and with who. So this is now what I want people to consider. So let me read that line again. Following are apparently extracts of the letter showing how 3 world wars have been planned for many generations. Okay, this is a quote now. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheist communism. The divergences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. Commentary in here quickly says students of history will recognize that the political alliances of England on one side and Germany on the other, forged between 1871 and 1898 by Otto von Bismarck, co-conspirator of Albert Pike, were instrumental in bringing about the First World War. And now when you read the history, apparently this Otto von Bismarck was a 33rd degree Mason as well, and it claims here co-conspirator of Albert Pike. So it's, these people are historical people, and so it's hard to deny the connection. Certainly the result of the First World War was that the czars in Russia were destroyed. The Bolshevik Revolution, which now has been linked quite clearly in history to the Zionist funding to bring about atheism and communism in that country. And it did, in fact, create, again, if it was written in 1958, how did William Guy Carr know that communism would be so successful and would be built into such a powerful expression in the world? Okay, now the second quote. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. Remember, the political Zionists now were started again, we know, in 1897 or something like that was the whole Zionist movement. And then by the end of World War I, what you have is the Balfour Declaration, committing to this state of Israel, which history proves has been nothing short of a terrorist organization from the very outset. So now, again, I'm not trying to pretend that all these things are to be taken as gospel. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that it's very hard to imagine that this all is just a coincidence, that history followed these things that were at very latest were written in the late 50s. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. So again, if this was written as fiction, it's very interesting that history has participated in that fiction. Now listen to the comment here about history, because I find this to be sort of the anchor for this idea. This is the commentary now in this threeworldwars.com. After the Second World War, communism was made strong enough to begin taking over weaker governments. In 1945, at the Potsdam Conference between Truman, Churchill, and Stalin, a large portion of Europe was simply handed over to Russia. And on the other side of the world, the aftermath of the war with Japan helped to sweep the tide of communism into China. So, I've been trying to point out for some time, without understanding the intricacies of the history, that it is in fact quite clear from history that the Zionist funding of the Bolshevik Revolution results in this atheist state of Russia, which then somehow becomes so strong in a world that was still, for the most part, religious, Christian, Muslim, right? Communism was a new thing, and yet instead of being stomped out, as this is pointing out, after the Second World War, a large portion of Europe was simply handed over to Russia. And the defeat of Japan helped to allow this communism to, as we've talked about, General Mao and this Cultural Revolution, which is, again, nothing short of a genocide of the free and spiritual existence of China, which had one of the oldest, if not the oldest, known empires in the world. I mean, China had been a Confucian empire of deep spiritual people up until this General Mao's Cultural Revolution, which all just seems to fit too nicely into somebody's deeper program, right? Somebody's agenda. Now, here's the part about the Third World War. So again, I want to just take it slow enough to remember where we're going with this. I'm talking about the things that happened the other day in France. I'm talking about the rise of this Islamic State. I'm talking about this self-proclaimed caliphate that can't even get the Sunni Muslims in the cities it controls to want to join them, but our ally Saudi Arabia has to pay $1,000 a day to create these jihadists, these fanatics, and that somehow we fund with the CIA, with Saudi Arabia. We send the Toyota trucks over there, and that seems to be the bulk of their transportation. And yet, all the bombing that's gone on by the most sophisticated weapons in the world can't even blow up their Toyota trucks, but instead they spread like a cancer throughout the world, even though their own people don't want anything to do with them if somebody's not paying these mercenaries to join them. So just all, the ISIS thing has been fishy from the beginning. The evidence points from this Arab Spring and this propaganda, the funding through our allies, the fact that their money seems to come from a single oil refinery that not Russia or America can bomb out of existence. Now, let's get to this quote. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agent of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. Remember now, agents of the Illuminati. So what are we saying? That the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world are both agents of the Illuminati. In other words, they've been planted, right? Well, what do we have in our history, right? Iranian Revolution, Shah of Iran, Mubarak, Kingdom of Jordan, Kingdom of Saud, right? All these places where from England to the United States for 100 years, we've had our hands in there, all right? And so what comes out of this Islamic world that's, when you study the Quran, these people aren't allowed to kill anyone. They're not allowed to, these jihads. This isn't Islam. This is not Muslim. And yet none of our journalists, there's not one strain of journalism in America that points out that none of this is Islamic at all. This Islamic State, this self-proclaimed radical caliphate that not even his own people want to join. None of this is Islamic, and yet that's not pointed out at all. But what we can see instead is that what's claimed here anyway, is that what they need to do is foment. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and political Zionism, and in quotes it says the Muslim Arabic world for Islam, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, and let me stop there real quick. Let me just backtrack. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. So, interesting, maybe, that in the Judeo-Christian scriptures, only a remnant of Israel is saved, right? The rest are killed, right? They're slaughtered almost to a man. If the days weren't shortened, there'd be no flesh left to save. They have to flee in the end to a place prepared for them, right? If you know the scripture. So the Judeo-Christian scripture clearly has the state of Israel being destroyed. This is scripture now. This isn't fiction. This is the scripture that comes down to us long before any of this was written. And also in the Quran, I've learned. The Quran says that 99 out of every 100 that take part in that final war, what the Christians call Armageddon, and the Muslims call the Malhama, 99 out of every 100 that take part in that war will be destroyed. So, again, is this just coincidence, or are these, or whoever wrote this fiction, are they simply trying to plagiarize, fictionalize, predict what the scriptures always talked about? You know, it all fits quite comfortably, anyway, that this war must be fomented such that, conducted in such a way that Islam and the state of Israel mutually destroy each other. And this is kind of, Dad, what we tried to get at last week and what I've been getting at for weeks, and why last week's show was titled Engineering World War III, because, tying all these strings with the history that we're watching, this fake war with ISIS, this fake offensive of bombing ISIS for a year and getting nowhere, this fake propaganda of not expecting Russia to come in, and then suddenly Russia's in, and suddenly there's all this tension with Russia, which keeps us building up arms on both sides. Okay, so as I say, for me, it seems just a little bit cozy with this prediction. And remember, this quote is at very minimum from 1958. So how they could know in 1958 that communism, remember, they were just given this territory after World War II in 1945. Russia wasn't so strong. I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution succeeded in killing the czars. It succeeded in exterminating the Christians from the Ukraine and from that area of what we call Russia. It succeeded in establishing communism as an atheist state in the world, but it hadn't succeeded in taking over Christian Europe and being an equal force with Britain, the United States, and the rest of Europe, and Japan and China and all the rest of the world that was not communist. But as we read, after World War II in 1945, a large part of Europe was just handed over to Russia to get them ready for this, apparently, World War III. Again, so it wasn't very long after that that this quote can be confirmed in a book as being something that this William Guy Carr was presenting as being a letter that this Cardinal Rodriguez was aware of as a letter supposedly written from Albert Pike to Mazzini in the late 19th century. So let's go on now, because we're not finished with the quote here. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and the State of Israel mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. And now I'm going to propose that here's where we are in the plan today. So I want to read it one more time. Meanwhile, the other nations. What other nations? Right? What other nations? You mean America, Russia, Germany, France, Britain, China, all the people that are preparing for war today? Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and constrained to fight. Think of what that says. Not provoked, constrained to fight. Right? Meaning strings will be pulled. They will be brought to fight to complete physical, moral, spiritual. Over what? Once more divided on this issue. Which issue? Well, let's go back. War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. Right? The crusade, sort of. Not really, but the new crusade for the Promised Land, this state of Israel, God's people that all the Christians have to protect now from these radical Muslims, neither of which resembles the religion whatsoever. Neither Christianity nor Islam has any of this in its religion, and yet here we are, State of Israel, terrorist Zionist State of Israel, turning the Muslims into their terrorist, aggressor enemies. And then, meanwhile, I'm going to go back to the quote now. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. So if you want to know what's coming in the world, this is what, the events that just happened in Paris, though I've predicted them, and I predict that this is only the beginning. Why? Because look what the point is. We'll be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil, which of course it has been and was funded to be. Again, if we're going to stop now and retrace our steps, who funded this Bolshevik revolution, but this same Zionist agenda? So now you have to look, well, who funded this Zionist agenda? This seems to claim agents of the Illuminati, unless anybody think that that's some, what does that mean but whoever's pulling the strings? Let's just keep it simple so we don't have to fight over who is the Illuminati. Let's just say that's who's pulling the strings. That's who's paying the bills. That's who funded the Zionist movement in the first place. which again, coincidentally, goes back to this very time that people like Pike and Mazzini and those that followed them were on the scene. So, let's get back to it now. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which is what we're seeing today, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil, which of course it was and has been. I'm currently in Budapest, Hungary, where they have the history, they've seen the history of it. The few things I've been able to see about this area of the world makes me think twice about it makes our absurd warmongering capitalist nations look like sweethearts compared to what they paid these communist atheists to do to people. The genocides of the Ukrainians, the way that it's as if they just wanted to create bloody turmoil. Origin of savagery and of the most bloody turmoil. So again, that was all funded, and it really did live up to that reputation in history, right? Back to this quote. Then everywhere, the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. End quote. So that takes one more little moment to analyze. So let me go back to it. Then everywhere, the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries. Okay, again, where are we today? ISIS, these jihadists, these somehow what we want to call Muslim terrorists, a complete misnomer if there ever was one. But aren't they a world minority? Aren't they becoming what this claimed? I mean, is it even possible that William Guy Carr wrote this as a fiction over 50 years ago, and today we the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction. So now this crosses over now into this deeper idea, and most, I think, Christians of the world, though I don't know how to render that word anymore because Christians don't know anything about Christianity, but they do know about God. They do have what is quoted here, deistic spirits. We come from the rest, all of humanity had deistic spirits for the most part. Hindus have deistic spirits. Confucians, for the most part, had deistic spirits. I mean, Confucius and his followers weren't ready to define God, but they also weren't ready to say that there is no spirit beyond all that organizes and makes things what they are. So humanity itself is endowed with a deistic spirit, and I believe that's what whoever wrote this is talking about, that we the people are going to become obliged to exterminate these destroyers of civilization, which are these terrorists we have right now. See, we're obliged to destroy them. and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity. Well, that brings me to everything I talk about on our Sunday show, Dad, that, the Christianity has become something that's disillusioned even the Christian. Nobody can believe in this stupidity anymore except for the absolute brainwashed, brain dead hypocrites that imagine Christians are going to Club Med in the sky and all non-believers are going to hell. So the rest of the world, the multitude, is disillusioned with Christianity. What has Christianity shown itself to be? Are they like the first church that went out and helped people and saved people and loved people and gave everything and healed people? That's not what Christianity is. Hard to be disillusioned with that. The Mother Teresas of the world. Nobody gets disillusioned with Mother Teresa. You make them saints. You revere them for all history. So if you're going to disillusion the population, the multitude, with Christianity, well, that also takes some sort of effort. And I say that's the effort that has given us our modern version of Christianity, which Jesus seems to regard in Revelation as the Laodicean age of the church. Lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. We're not non-believers, but we're believers that don't look like anything like Christians except in word. And so they have to be spit out of his mouth, all this Christianity. So again, the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction. From what moment? After this war they're bringing about, where we have to defend ourselves against this minority of revolutionaries and exterminate those destroyers of civilization, leaving the multitude wondering, where do we turn next, right? The atheism is savage, barbaric, and results in bloody turmoil. The Christianity is fake and hypocrisy, and yet we, the multitude, with our deistic spirits from that moment, will be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration. And now will be the opportunity for the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. And that's where I want to wrap it back up today, back into the, where we've been for weeks, Dad, is that this Third World War started out by saying it must be fomented by taking advantages of the differences caused between the State of Israel and Islam, and that the war would be conducted in a way that they would mutually destroy each other. But now what's that got to do with Christianity and atheism? Neither of those are Christian or atheist. So isn't that interesting that in this prediction from at least 1958, you have a war that has to bring the Zionists, the State of Israel, and the Islamic world into a mutually destructive war with each other, and that these world minority of revolutionaries, and let me go back to how it says it, then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries. Everywhere. So see, all of a sudden we have this worldwide problem. And that worldwide problem results in Christianity and atheism destroying each other. And now who represents atheism but this Russia in the traditional sense that we've grown up with, and who represents Christianity but Britain, America, and Western Europe. And what do we see today? So, and now to tie it in briefly to the prophecies, one last time, you have both in the Quran and the Judaic Christian scriptures, Israel and the Muslims being destroyed. And you have what we're currently waiting for, this white horse to come out, this righteous ruler that's going to be given a crown, and he'll go forth conquering and to conquer. Um, this Sunday, I really want to talk about the rapture, because it's bringing into view now the moment when we need to discuss how does that all play in? Does it play in? What's the reality of that? But the reality of this white horse, this opening of the first seal of Revelation, for many years we saw the traditional view that meant peace, that the 7-year covenant made with many is a peace covenant. But I've been feeling and trying to point out that I no longer see it that way. I see the way I've learned from the Muslim interpretation of the same verse of Revelation. This white horse refers to a righteous ruler. He's given a crown, as we know, that's a crown of honor, not of victory in battle. But he uses this crown of honor to go forth conquering and to conquer, and following him is war, famine, and death. Not righteousness, not peace, war, famine, and death. So whatever brings about the conditions in which this righteous king is given a crown, what comes out of that rise to rulership is war. And what we've been talking about for some time, and it seems quite pertinent now, that another caliph has to rise to take out the caliph that's in there, which amounts to this world minority of revolutionaries being called out in these articles that I just read you today, or the articles, if you go to read them yourselves, you will see the Islamic State is calling out all Muslims to start killing people, even if it means poisoning food and water. I mean, I found that a very disturbing thing to read, and I'm going to go ahead and put my neck out on the line again and predict that we are going to see escalation of this. There's going to be more false flags, claimed by Islamic State. Maybe even some by the end, or by the time this white horse king has to go conquering and to conquer, we are going to see some horrible things, poisoning of food and water, perhaps, really some horrible offenses. I mean, that's what seems to be, I can't figure how to draw all the strings together and not include the elements that seem obvious on the surface, and the only things that could bring about such a conflagration of the whole world, such a disillusionment with everything, that all these deistic spirits that are left, these people who are wondering what to believe in, will have an opportunity to believe in the pure doctrine of Lucifer, according to this quote. So that's how I see it right now, Dad. Unfortunately, or for people that are actually waiting for for the Lord to return. Well, this is the time. I mean, this is all of this has to be encountered now with a false Messiah, and the true Messiah will come to save everyone from the agenda of the false Messiah. And the agenda of the false Messiah seems to be what's stated here at the end, this disillusionment caused by this great war. And we know the great war can't be. Jesus does not come to stop the great war. He comes to end it, I suppose, to be that final word in their plan. And if again, this would seem to substantiate the idea that, from a monotheistic view, from a spiritual view, that this is a spiritual happening, that there's a Satan behind it, a Lucifer behind it, that this cabal of men that Professor Quigley pointed to, are but the agents themselves, even the ones at the top pulling the strings of the inferior agents below them that are pointed out to be the professors, the bankers, and the educators, that these people are all themselves part of what the Quran clearly understands as the spirit of Dajjal at work, the Antichrist. And for Christians, there's no reason not to believe the same thing when Paul himself says the spirit of Antichrist is already at work. What's he at work doing? What's the plan been all along? Remember, we're only talking about 100 years or so. So we're literally in this, all three world wars that we are aware of in our lifetime. I mean, in our scope of history, what we might call the history of the great wars. We seem to feel that these are all separate periods of time happening as their own organic evolutions of humanity in their progress through statehood and through nationalism and through identity in that way. But I would like to present that the reason we can, if we step back further, you can see that the first two wars quite conceivably fit as a unity, and that the war that's coming fits as a finale to something that's really only 100 years old, in something that may be considered to at least be going on since the time of Christ, from a scriptural standpoint, of the false deliverer coming on the scene and attempting to do what God says the Messiah will do, rule forever from Jerusalem. Because if in fact someone else can stand in the place of Jesus and rule from Jerusalem, well then perhaps that's the equivalent of God being proved false and the devil winning, if such a thing is, if I may be permitted the anthropomorphic vision of the devil fighting against God to win something. Could it be anything but achieving outside of God's plan the alternative, an alternative, that he might have his Messiah rule the world instead of God have his Messiah rule the world. So anyway, that's what I've got this week, Dad. There's so much more to study with all this. I hope that it encourages people out there to have a little bit deeper view and to be aware of the times we're coming to. This is not going to go away. And that's not to scare anyone, because as Sheikh Imran Hossein says, we're not afraid to die. Muslims, Christians, we're not afraid to die. We're not supposed to be. Life is but a short passing phase of a spiritual existence and a spiritual reality. And so death is nothing to be afraid of. And we need to, if anything, stand in the face of what's going on and be a light to others, to give strength to those that need it. And so anyway, we talk about some of that in our Sunday show, but thanks for having me on in our Wednesday Bible study, sorry. So thanks for having me on the show, Dad, and I'll talk to you soon.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. That was indeed a very educational show that we put on today, and I thank you very much for it. And folks, if this is edifying you, then remember why we do this. This is a storehouse where you get your meat, because the Lord said you give to the storehouse where you get your meat, so that meat's available to all of those who come seeking it 24/7. This ministry's been doing that for a long, long time, over 20 years now on the internet. And the Lord uses a symbol for that giving to that storehouse. You see, you give with frankincense. That's how you give. Frankincense in the old days, in the time of the tabernacle in the wilderness, represented to a Jew hilarity and joy. God wanted the gift that they gave to him to be done with hilarity and joy. That's why he wanted them to burn that frankincense along with it. It was to teach them That lesson in that wilderness is the same to us today, to teach us that we give to God what he asks and we give it to him his way. He asks to have the gift to the storehouse where you get your meat given with frankincense, hilarity, and joy, because you know what you're doing and you're doing it on purpose. So folks, if this is the storehouse where you get your meat, then stand up and cheer loudly, because it's offering time. Right at the top of our page at BroSal and over at the Philadelphia Church, there's a frankincense offering button right up in the title. And we appreciate those offerings. That's what keeps us in touch with the Lord and you in touch with the Lord. You do it for you because he asked you to, and it keeps this word coming to you. So until we see you again next week, we thank you for the offerings, but we want you to have